Welcome back. Democratic Congresswoman Debbie Dingell is here on the auto strike and the possible U.S. government shutdown. Our lead story is the auto strike and Mr. Trump to visit UAW strikers. On the OTR panel this week, Zachary Gorchow, Paula Gardner, and Bill Ballinger. Sit in with us as we get the inside out, off the record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. And now, this edition of Off the Record with Tim Skubic.
Thank you very much. Welcome to our program. We are taping on Thursday afternoon, and so lots of stuff will happen after the show is on, and everything we say here will be irrelevant. But like, we got to put a show in the can. Eh? Bring us up to speed on the auto strike. Any glimmer of hope that an agreement is close?
Not to us. No, not to the rest of the world. Inside the negotiating rooms, possibly. We don't know. We'll find out on Friday as we sit here whether the strike will be extended. And, you know, as I said, we have no idea.
How's this playing out?
Well, for now, because it's limited to 3 plants and only one in the state of Michigan, it's not the kind of Armageddon scenario of like all 3 companies being struck by the UAW and almost 150,000 workers going on strike. That was the nightmare kind of scenario people were thinking about. So the UAW is being very strategic, pick these 3 plants to start with high priority vehicles. I think to Paula's point, the big question is, do they expand the stand-up strike, as they're calling it? Do more workers walk out from other plants on strike? And then what does that mean? So right now, I think it's in some ways a curiosity for those of us not involved directly. Obviously, it's a matter of critical importance to the workers themselves. I only think if it starts to expand, does the political dimension take on a stronger component.
But beyond the political dimension, the economic impact is already spreading. So we've got each of the automakers has laid off additional workers. We've got suppliers, including in Michigan, panicking. And they are very worried, especially second tier, third tier suppliers who basically have no bankability. They can't get loans. They're wondering how they'll be able to stretch things out. They may only have one customer among the big 3. They may only make one part for those vehicles. And that's a real question mark right now for Michigan.
Bill, previous auto strikes in our beloved state have not had draconian implications beyond the bargaining table. This one, a lot of people are framing as the future of the auto industry, as we know it today, is really on the table too.
Right, I think it is, and I hate to sound pessimistic, but I think it's likely the strike is going to be extended. I think there are going to be more layoffs. I think the ripple effect into the suppliers and so forth that we've just been hearing about is going to be pronounced. And the electric vehicle issue as part of all this going on is really a key. And, you know, how the UAW can absorb that. And we already know Shawn Fain has withheld support for President Biden and the UAW support for President Biden because they're very, very worried about the future of auto workers with an electric vehicle economy, particularly when you bring in the South where you've got non-union plants. It's a potential disaster economically down the road if this isn't somehow resolved, not just in the bargaining now, but going forward.
Some have suggested that Tesla is the real winner here.
Tesla's already won. When you look at the top 10 EV sales in the nation first half of this year, the top 2 are Teslas with a combined 320-some thousand units, and the closest big 3 maker in the list then is number 3 with 24,000. The gap is enormous.
So let's do the math. If these auto workers picketing now get more money for the auto workers that are making batteries, the competitive price between Tesla and the American vehicle goes wider.
It's like Bill said, it is sort of this precipice moment. The workers are looking back and saying, hey, wait a minute, we gave up a lot during the Great Recession. And, hey, don't go, Detroit 3 automakers, don't go starting these new plants that aren't union organized. But, we've seen in the last few years in Michigan, Ford, GM, they're willing to go to non-union states and places and invest countries and invest massive amounts of money and these are not union organized places. So it really does feel like there's some kind of a tipping point here. Will the management decide to do what they used to do in some ways, which is we got to keep labor happy, and if it means maybe we've overpaid down the road, we'll deal with it? Or do they say, no, we're not going to make the mistakes we did in the past?
But broadening it, I think the U.S. is going to have to ask itself, as a result of this strike, what are we willing to accept for manufacturing? So if we're comparing to Tesla, their production workers are also making about $20 an hour. The $20 an hour that we're fighting in Michigan, we're watching a fight to increase. So, is it a race to the bottom then? Do we still value manufacturing in the same way? And even policy-wise, the nation and the state is subsidizing it.
And also to your point about the politics of this story, Donald Trump is really on this issue, and here's what's going on there.
Is he trying to exploit this auto strike?
Of course he is. He tends to try to exploit everything that he can.
When former President Donald Trump comes to Michigan later this month to meet with striking UAW workers, he will not have to worry very much about getting an audience, as 46% of all union members, including those from the UAW, are supporting Mr. Trump in Michigan. But if you're President Joe Biden, Michigan pollster Bernie Porn asserts that he should be concerned because he was elected last time with strong union support. But that support now is not there at the levels that it needs to be, according to Mr. Porn. And now, with that at risk, Mr. Biden could lose this election if UAW workers don't come home.
That is, I think, entirely possible.
Part of Mr. Trump's UAW support relates to his opposition to the president's push for more electric vehicles, which Mr. Trump says will cost UAW members their jobs. And while the Biden administration is pushing a counter-argument to create more UAW jobs by building EV batteries in Michigan and elsewhere, current assembly line jobs, however, could be lost while they're waiting for those new jobs to come online. Right, Mr. Porn?
That is, I believe, a problem. That's why he needs to try and come up with some messaging that talks about transitioning and getting the cooperation of the big three in doing that.
Meanwhile, the UAW president fired off a news release calling Mr. Trump a millionaire and adding this: he doesn't really have any understanding as to what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. And yet there's another challenge for Democrats. Assuming that these strikers do get higher salaries for those who create the EV batteries, that will increase the cost of those cars, compared to the lower sticker price on the Tesla EVs produced by non-union workers.
Yep, these are all concerns that have to be worked out.
And if the Democrats don't work this out, they could have a heap of problems next Election Day in 2024. So, Mr. Ballinger, has Mr. Trump scooped this issue away from the Ds?
Absolutely, at least for the time being. Now, Debbie Dingell, I've heard her on national shows, and she says, no, it's not a problem for Democrats. We can handle this.
But is she whistling through the graveyard?
I think she is. Right now, look, Trump is a master at seizing on particular issues and exploiting them to the max. And it's obvious that he has seized on EVs as a bugbear that is going to kill the Michigan economy and the national economy, and he's coming into Michigan and he's going to wreak havoc. And the real question is, who is he going to meet with, these UAW workers? I'd like to see who they are. They better be careful. But that's going to be an interesting session, and what kind of publicity is going to come out of that?
I mean, it's the fall of 2023. I just can't, unless this turns into a total meltdown. In a year, they're still on strike or something like that. I just don't think this is ultimately going to amount to much. Does it get Trump some news cycles? Yes. Do the Democrats appear to be on the defensive a little bit with this? Yes, they do. And look, Trump went from winning Macomb County by 12 points in 2016 to about 8 points in 2020. He had these kinds of people who are out on strike. These are some of the votes he lost. He needs to get back. And it could help at the margins, but there's just so much to go before this this
But
really matters.
with all due respect, this EV issue is not going away. Let's assume they resolve the strike. You still got a plant going down in Marshall, which is causing a controversy. You got a plant going in Big Rapids. Look, at the Republicans will ride this thing as long and as hard as they can to keep it alive.
Well, you see what's in the past, the Republicans would have come in big on the side of business here and said they are just the UAW is trying to destroy the economy. Union bosses, we would have heard all that. Haven't heard a peep about that, which is again a sign of how much things have changed. They're sympathizing with the workers, but then saying this is Joe Biden's fault that this strike is happening, which is really an interesting pivot from where the Republicans have been historically.
And I find the Donald Trump situation pretty interesting too. Not a political insider, but he's made his name by speaking for people who feel like they have lost something. And many of these auto workers feel that way. However, they're also working a different side of it right now with the negotiations, and it doesn't seem like he can logically even find a place to land.
Well, this is a perfect issue for the Republicans because it's a 1-2 punch. Punch one is the EVs. The second punch is the money for EVs is going to you-know-what, communist China. Huh?
Yeah, absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. I think that's exactly what Trump is exploiting. Debbie Dingell, when I've heard her, this is the congresswoman from downriver, she said, downriver. She has said that basically what's happened is that I've lost my train of thought.
Yeah, well,
My fault, blame me.
Basically, she thinks they can get their way out of this thicket. They can figure this out, and it's a long-term problem, and the Democrats will be on top, and people won't understand. I don't know.
It's an interesting, again, for the Democrats, where they struggle with this environment and worker divide. It's been an issue for them for a long time. On the one hand, stop climate change, cleaner vehicles, and so forth. But on the other hand, it takes fewer workers to produce an electric vehicle. Electric vehicles cost a ton more, which again kind of goes against their old working class base, a base the Republicans are peeling votes away from. So it creates some challenges for them, and some new opportunities for Republicans. But again, I don't believe the 2024 election is going to be decided by this.
What I was going to say is that Debbie Dingell believes that Donald Trump was the worst president we ever had because he sent jobs to China. That's the argument she claims the Democrats are going to be able to make to refute everything that Trump is trying to exploit right now. Now, whether she's able to do that or not, that remains to be seen.
Well, we do know in this state that China does resonate as a political issue.
Absolutely.
Ask Jennifer Granholm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ask Mark Brewer.
Yes.
Ask Dick DeVos.
Yes, absolutely.
It was a long time ago. It's 18 years ago.
Yeah.
Democrats both sides have tried the China card since then. It hasn't had nearly the potency as it did in 2006.
You think it's lost some of its oomph?
I think it's not the nickel, as you use the old John Engler thing. I think you once referenced it on the show. It's not the potent issue it once was. I mean, look, Buick makes cars in China. All three big three make cars in China. It is not as potent. Yes, it is still something that you can use and, take some shots at for sure.
GM sells more cars in China than they do in the U.S., and also more Chinese automakers are expected to come to the U.S. and possibly Michigan, not just suppliers, but there are a lot of startups in the EV world.
Has the governor been very vocal on all of this stuff?
No.
Have you noticed?
Not
Yes.
at all. She's
Why?
been very
Get a comment.
quiet.
Why?
I think because she's pushing this EV green energy agenda, and a lot of that is meeting a lot of resistance.
We'll give Zach the last word. Go ahead.
Oh, I will say, they do not want to talk about the jobs they're losing. It's like the push for education, the push for training, the push for all of that, and the new jobs that require more training, blah, 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 is all a smokescreen for all the jobs they're losing or could lose.
All right, let's go to our interview with Debbie Dingell. Hi, we are pleased to welcome back to the Off the Record program Ms. Dingell. First of all, thank you for doing this. Let's cut right to the chase. You were recently quoted as calling the White House with a complaint on how they were handling this auto strike. What was your beef, Madam Congresswoman?
Well, what was reported was perhaps something that I said, not thinking it would be written about. I communicated to President Fain that I had been surprised at what the president had said on Labor Day, because I did believe that we could be where we are now, and we are looking at a strike in the United Auto Workers against all three companies.
What kind of grades would you give the White House on handling this situation to date?
Look, quite frankly, I'm sick and tired of everybody asking what the White House is doing. This is a bargaining, negotiating table between the companies and the employees. The president should not be intervening in this strike. I think all of us policymakers, Republicans and Democrats, need to understand what policies can help have a competitive auto industry, make sure the workers are being supported and being paid a fair wage, which they, it's 2008 and 2009. Everybody gave to help save this industry. It's now we need to level the field for the workers, make sure they're being paid for the jobs that they're doing, that they're not having to work overtime, that people are getting the COLA that they lost in 2008 and 2009. But quite frankly, I think all presidential candidates should be staying out of this actual negotiation at the table. And we need to understand, okay, what do we need to do to make sure we stay a competitive auto industry?
So, Ms. Dingell, what kind of marks would you give the White House on handling the strike?
Well, they're not handling the strike, gang. That's my first thing. But two, the president has talked to all sides, but made it clear last Friday that he was standing with the workers.
Ms. Dingell, all the politicians, including you, have been rushing to the defense of the UAW picketers. But once you were a General Motors lobbyist in Washington, D.C., back in the day before you were elected to public office. So what about General Motors and the Big Three in this situation? Are they the villains? Are they the bad guys?
Bill, I've been very careful. If you've listened to my language, I want people to understand what the workers are fighting for. They gave in 2008 and 2009, and quite frankly, it was mismanagement that caused what happened in 2008 and 2009, and nobody wanted to see them go bankrupt. But those workers gave up their COLA. And in real terms today, they're making, with inflation, they're making less money than they made in 2008 and 2009. So they want their COLA back. You've got tiers now on lines where you've got people doing the exact same job that are making significant difference in the two salaries that they're making. And they want job security. I want a competitive auto industry. If we don't have a competitive domestic auto industry, there are not going to be jobs for them to work at. But it is the workers have a right to have these issues addressed, and that's what this is about.
Congresswoman, what about the 32-hour work week concept? There's some pieces that, as I've read this from afar, that some analysts have said this is just a bridge too far, or is that kind of the next wave of worker reforms and that sort of thing to go to something like a 32-hour work week? What do you make of a proposal like that?
I think President Fain put out, as you do, what he said publicly is what happens at the beginning of any labor negotiation. And by the way, what you're hearing at that table isn't not similar to what we are all hearing by a lot of people. I quite frankly think people should still be in offices as we come out of the pandemic, and a lot of people want to work from home. I think you got to have these discussions at the table between the management and the workers and figure out where that common ground is so that you get the job done, deliver a good product, but recognize that the worker is still the backbone of success.
What the workers are asking for, do you think pushes it too far for competitiveness for the automakers and might put them at risk of bankruptcy or acquisition in the next few years?
So I'm not going to bargain at a table. As much as I love you all, and off the record, and all of you, I'm not going to bargain for them at the table. These are real. I'm not in that room either. I'm not at the table. They're looking at financial figures. They're talking to each other. I know that the UAW knows they've got to have companies that are in business. They don't want to drive sales to other companies, to companies that aren't paying a decent wage, and are building cars that are too expensive for anybody to afford. So, but I'm not in that room, and I'm not going to give you those kinds of answers.
What about the jobs bank that the UAW wants back? Could you explain what that is, and is that a reasonable request?
again, it's not the jobs banks, what you and I, Bill, we're showing that we're seasoned, is something that was there a while ago. They are trying to keep community strong and talk about if someone is displaced or lose something, is there a way for them to give back in the community or stay in the community? Again, they're talking about it at the table. I'm not in the room. I'm not going to get into the details of, I can explain to people what these key issues are. And the three issues that absolutely matter and you must have are COLA, tiers, and job security.
Ms. Dingell, did Mr. Trump scoop the Democrats on the EV issue?
What does that mean, scoop? I don't think
he's taken ownership of that issue, and he is making hay, and he's coming into this state, and you guys look like you're playing defense. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Let me be very clear. I've been very clear that it's not either or. We got to do both. We've got to worry about the environment. Look at the floods and the tornadoes we just had in Michigan.
I understand that. The question was,
we have to build electric vehicles. Bill, he says we're going to build them 100% in China.
Nobody's arguing about that. I'm asking you, did Mr. Trump take this issue away from you?
He did not. But he did not take it away from us. And what he's doing is being anti-EV. Right now, we are competing in a competitive global marketplace. In Europe, more than half the sales are alternative vehicle fuels, mostly electric vehicles. By the way, we're selling in that market. So Donald Trump's not fighting to do it here, doesn't think we should be doing it. Do you remember how many of you were around, and I think most of us were, when Japan beat us because the domestic auto industry wasn't ahead of the curve, didn't see what the product demand was going to be, and we weren't ready to build small cars. And we took a beating then. Well, we can't take a beating. We got to be ready to build those electric vehicles now, and we have to make sure that we're doing it in a competitive way, and we've got to make sure that as we transition to the vehicles of the future, the worker is part of that, and we have to make sure the companies are competitive.
Do you think the UAW will eventually endorse President Biden? The UAW endorse Joe Biden?
You know, Bill, I don't know. I'm not going to speculate on right now. They're focused on getting the deal for the workers. They're focused on the discussions between themselves and the companies. They've made it very clear how they feel about Donald Trump and that he would be another Trump term would be a disaster. You go from there.
Congresswoman, are you encouraging leadership and other Democrats in the legislature to adjourn the legislature for the year earlier than usual so that the earlier presidential primary law will take effect in time?
I've had continued discussions with the governor's office and the legislature. This has been a 40-year fight to have a heartland state be part of the early primaries. Our issues really reflect the issues that determine what the presidential outcome is. Our legislature and others promised the DNC, if Michigan got moved up early, that we would meet that date. I am not. The discussions are ongoing in Lansing between all about what's going to happen. But I do believe that it is critical that this has been, Carl Levin started it. Some of you will remember that the first 10 years, I'm like, you can't change the rules in the middle of the game. We've worked very hard to get to this point. The two small states like New Hampshire and Iowa should not have the disproportionate impact they do on nominating presidential candidates. And I think it's good for the Republican Party, and I think it's good for the Democratic Party. When we took it on, the last few times the Republicans and the Democrats did this together, we all supported it. The National Republican Party this time, because they have a very complicated political situation, did their rules earlier than the DNC did. In the long term, this is going to be a win for the country because we're going to be talking about issues that matter to everyday people. And in the 2028, there will be a heartland state that is in the early states that reflects the issues that matter in the November election.
So the legislature is going to adjourn early. Is that what you're saying?
I don't know, Bill. I know that we're going to have a presidential primary. The DNC was told by leadership we will have a presidential primary in February on the date that we now know.
You feel that if for that to happen, for the legislature to make good on the promise you said was made, that they need to adjourn early, do what it takes to make it happen?
I don't tell the legislature what to do. I don't get into their business. I don't get into mine. We all worked hard to have a state like Michigan. And by the way, I'm going to tell you all that Michigan business supported this as strongly as unions and others did, because they know how important it is to have presidential candidates talking about everyday issues that matter to people like us in the heartland, which have a diversity of all kinds of issues, from manufacturing to farming.
I got to take it back to the strike. That's all I'm thinking about right now. I'm seeing public support was 50-some%, possibly to decline the longer it goes and the further it reaches. Do Democrats still stand behind the union at that point? And where does that go?
Okay, Paula, could you restate that? I didn't quite
If public support diminishes for the union, what happens politically among Democrats?
Look, I know that I've never been a person that takes a stand because of the way the wind blows. What I do is to do what I think is right. And I think that you will see, there are Republicans supporting the union too, just for the record, and some of them are in Michigan. I'm going to stand for the workers and the issues that I just laid out. I hope it's not a long strike. I think the strike is going to remind people about the importance of the auto industry and that we're still the backbone of the American economy. But I'm not a person that goes with the political wind. I'm someone who stands up for what's right on all sides.
Congresswoman, you have agreed to do an overtime with us, so let's just take a pause right here. We'll look at Crow's credits, and we'll be back more with this with questions for you in just a little bit, okay?
Inquisition's a good word.
Thank you for also joining our program. We'll see you next week right here for more Off the Record.
Production of Off the Record is made possible in part by Martin Waymeyer, a full-service strategic communications agency, partnering with clients through public relations, digital marketing, and public policy engagement. Learn more at martinwaymeyer.com. For more Off the Record, visit WKAR.org. Michigan Public Television stations have contributed to the production costs of Off the Record.